Big business.
RSK, let it play, boy.
Yeah.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. I wake up and say me a prayer, brush my teeth, babe, then I throw on some threads. Wash my face, grab a cup, pour me some yum, put on my backpack, then I'm off to the bread. I eat these devils for breakfast, gotta be careful. Whole lot of blood being shed in the streets. Running so wicked, I weep for the living, I drop a free cheer for the dead. All my white friends in my pocket, or either they loading onto this black card that I swipe. Say every time that I drop it, the verses be hitting more harder than problems of life. Rich, I collected 2 pennies from every person that willingly gave me advice. Being afraid can't exist in my spirit, I'm fearing no man but the Father in Christ. I put in work with the brothers, we stood on them corners from 10 to like 9 the same night, teaching our people the gospel, equipped with a camera, some posters, some speakers and mic. Every time that I see mama, she telling me, son, you gotta walk in the light. Christ, the bread of heaven, keep feeding my spirit, and I wanna load, not a slide. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
When I tell you I'm an Israelite, tribe of Judah, don't you take it personal. Bleed the blood on these demons, we purging them. Don't entertain Jezebels, we be curving them. Ayy, I got a ribbon, she virtuous. In person, this blue life ain't virtual. I can't forget when I heard the truth. I got cut with that word, it got surgical. Conviction can lead to repentance. I pray these verses encourage you. We repented, now we on the vertical. Judah rising, see Isaiah 32. Big business, nothing minuscule. I picked up that pen back in middle school. Guard your light and take heed who you listen to. Watch your mouth and your ears and your vision too. Hashatan and Shalkani won't finish you. In Mortal Kombat, this war is not physical. Gird your loins up and follow the general. Messiah is coming, that's scriptural. You gotta starve your flesh. The real war ain't even started yet. This look like a setup for a second exodus. I'm trying to be where the water at. Let's get it.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serve the same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
Yo, shalom, shalom. We're back. We're back as promised. Part 2, the origin of the Semitic people by the savant, the genius, the young phenom, the Gaon, the Hebrew of Israel. Man, I seen the feedback, man. The people are loving it. The people are loving it. The brother gave a lot of fire material last night. It was a late one, but it was a good one. And even the sister said that your presentation was the best presentation she's seen on the channel so far. So I'm going to give you your flowers, brother, man. Excellent job last night with the presentation. And the people can't wait to see it. So I'm not going to hold them up. And from there, with no further ado, I give it over to the young phenom, the savant, the Hebrew of Israel. Let's get it.
Shalom, shalom, everyone. Thanks for coming yesterday and today, and thanks for liking the presentation. I'm glad I was able to deliver something good and new to the people. And so for today's video, as it said, it's a part 2. And what I'm doing is providing the best case scenario to me for the origins of Proto-Afro-Asiatic people including Proto-Semites, because as we went over, there's various theories that you can choose. I mean, it's up to y'all if y'all want to say they come from the Horn of Africa, Yemen, Arabian Peninsula, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, or the Levant. It's up to y'all if you want to choose which area and which region. But I'm going to give the best case scenario tonight, and the most academic scenario, in my opinion, of the origins of Afroasiatic and Semites. And again, this is important because we know, according to scripture, that the Israelites descend from Shem, a Semite, and Semites are Afro-Asiatic people. So knowing where their origins are helps us know who the Israelites are as a people, as well as their ancestors. And that can lead us down to the modern descendants of the ancient Israelites. All right, so let's begin. So basal Eurasians, this is a bit of an important population to understand in your studies. So haplogroup DE more than likely originated with a group known as basal Eurasians. They migrated into Africa 70,000 years ago, carrying haplogroup E. Basal Eurasians, Middle Easterners, or the ancestors of ancient Middle Easterners, they were sort of in the Mesopotamia, Levantine region of the Near East. Here's also another map showing basal Eurasians being more in the Arabian Peninsula. All right, so y'all need to check out this paper, The Ancient Admixture into Africa from the Ancestors of Non-Africans. So it says a new study by Cole in 2020, so it literally just came out. It says massive Eurasian migration into Africa associated with the spread of haplogroup DE and its subclade E, as well as DO, and out of Eurasia, the reversal of human phylogeny. A new study concluded that there was a mass migration of non-African Eurasians back into Africa about 70,000 years ago, spreading the Eurasian haplogroups such as E and its parent DE within Africa, before additional waves of Eurasian admixture. Modern Africans, thus, are descendants of Paleo-Africans, and we'll get into who they are, and Afro-Sans, which merged in Africa between 70,000 years to 40,000 years ago. And here's actually a picture from the paper. It says the proposed admixture from ancestors of present-day non-Africans is indicated in green. So you have a West Eurasian population coming into Africa during the out of Africa bottleneck, and it affects Eastern Africans, but also Western Africans. So a lot of people don't know, but Western Africans technically have Eurasian DNA, and apparently it's this haplogroup E clad. It includes E1B1B and E1B1A. So it's a Eurasian haplogroup. So here's actually a good map showing haplogroup DE, basal Eurasians, which are ancestral West Eurasians, and they come into the Middle East. They come from the Middle East into Africa through Yemen and even through Sinai, and they begin to, of course, dominate Africa. But also, they're in Europe, and some of them, of course, remained in the Middle East, and even some went a little bit further east into places like India. So it says frequency of Y-DNA haplogroup E in modern populations and hypothetical migration routes from its ancestor clad DE in Southwestern Asia, the Middle East. Haplogroup E arrived in Africa about 77,000 years ago and diverged in the Horn of Africa. It arrived together with specific West Eurasian animals and later also diffused into various Paleo-African populations, as well as among the ancient North Africans, which were in population indigenous to Northern Africa and distinctly related or ancestral to modern West Asians. Haplogroup E and DE have a Middle Eastern origin. Haplogroup E migrated into Africa as part of a massive migration of basal Eurasians, ancestral West Eurasians, and then diffused and diversified within Africa. Specifically, the Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa, haplogroup DE next to CF were the basal Eurasian lineages which expanded from the Middle East. Again, basal Eurasians come from the Middle East. Haplogroup E comes from the Middle East. The ancestral lineage Y-DNA atom is suggested to have originated somewhere in the Middle East or in the Iranian plateau. Massive Eurasian migration and following a mixture created the many different African populations of today and are the result for the high genetic diversity observed in sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, modern Africans, sub-Saharan Africans, formed from indigenous Paleo-African groups and intrusive Afro-Sans, basal Eurasians, and ancient North Africans. Finally, there is the fact why haplogroup E is dominant among non-hunter-gatherers in Africa, and it is within the Eurasian clade DE, while indigenous African hunter-gatherers belong to haplogroups A00, and B. So, a biblical narrative that I do believe in, I would say that Hamites would be haplogroup A00, and B. And I can go into that at another date. So Paleo-Africans, true Africans or Paleo-Africans carried haplogroup E and B. Haplogroup A and B dominated Africa before E arrived. Here's a paper that shows ancient populations with haplogroup A and B basically dominating sub-Saharan Africa. Here's a closer image, actually. And y'all can see all the various points that they're in. Here are the various sub-branches of A and B. These will be the indigenous, the paleo, the true African population before E arrived. These would be hunter-gatherers. These would be people like Pygmies and Khoisanes and other various groups. Here's a paper that was done in 2014. It shows old North African groups were A1A, A1B, A3B2, and possibly B. So as you can see, Northeastern Africa, Northwestern Africa, West Africa, and South Africa was at one point dominated by haplogroup A and B. These could be the Hamites that we hear of in the scriptures. And here's another paper called Ancient West African Foragers in the Context of African Population History. The oldest African populations in West Africa are A and B clades or haplogroups. Here are the various haplogroups we found in Western Africa, the most ancient populations. The Y-DNA, of course, as I said, is A and B. The MT or mitochondrial DNA is L0 and L1. And y'all can look at these two papers. This was 2014, and this is a different one from 2020. So here's also another map of haplogroup A dominating the African continent. You find it, as I said, in West Africa, North Africa, East Africa, South Africa, all throughout Africa. And here's the same thing with haplogroup B dominating West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, North Africa, Eastern Africa. So if anyone ever says, E is the only haplogroup in Africa, it's not true. And if anyone ever says E is the oldest haplogroup in Africa, that's also not true. You had A and B. So people should understand that. So haplogroup E invaded Africa originally coming from the Near East. This is why E is considered Afro-Mediterranean. Haplogroup A and B is considered Paleo-African. So here's a good map showing E invading and, well, should I say, coming into Africa and pushing A and B down, because as I showed you in this other paper, that haplogroup A and B once was in Northern Africa, but it was pushed down further south. We can still find some A in places like Sudan. And here's a good map showing haplogroup E being considered Afro-Mediterranean. And here's haplogroup A and B being considered African. All right. So let me make sure. All right. But back to haplogroup E. It more than likely originated in the Middle East and came into Africa as these basal Eurasian peoples. Here's a paper that actually goes into it. It says the distribution of the E1B1B E-M35, previously known as E3B1-M35, and its derivatives E1B1B1B1C E-M123 and E1B1B1C1 E-M34 in Yemen, Qatar, and UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates, suggests that these haplotypes arrived in Arabia more likely through the Levantine corridor rather than through the Straits of Bab el-Hadamba. The Near East is another possible origin. The Near East is another possible place of origin of the E1B1B1C-M123 lineage due to its high frequency in the area compared to it is Eastern Africa presence restricted to Ethiopia. However, Flores at 2005 study found that the highest frequency of the E1B1B1C1 E-M34 to date is in the Dead Sea population sample from Jordan at 31%. In Saudi Arabia, two individuals carrying the basal, which is the oldest, lineage of E-M96 have been identified. DE-YAP evolved outside of Africa. One DE-YAP, or let me see. All right, oops. All right. So one DE-YAP ancestor possibly spread into Asia and evolved into haplogroup D, and another DE-YAP ancestor returned to Africa and evolved into haplogroup E. So here's a paper from Razeb Khan. He actually has a Clubhouse account as well, but he says Arabia between Africa and Eurasia, and in his article he says all Africans may have ancestry from West Eurasians populations which moved back into Africa after the Out of Africa event 50,000 years ago. But keep in mind that Arabians and Levantines, which are people in Israel, do show less Neanderthal ancestry. West Eurasians were likely from the Near East. The ones that we have, the West Asian DNA we have is likely from the Near East, is what he's saying. And then he says, in some sense, all Africans may be a bit Arabian. So all Africans, including West Africans and Central Africans, do technically have Middle Eastern ancestry. This West Eurasian ancestry is specifically Near Eastern. An ancient Near Eastern origin is the best candidate for haplogroup E, and haplogroup E more than likely originated within a group of basal Eurasians. With that being said, what did basal Eurasians look like? After all, these are quote unquote Eurasian. So are they white? Are they Arab? Are they Middle Eastern looking? Let's take a look and see. So you can read this paper, the Levantine cranium from the Menot cave in Israel foreshadows the first European modern humans. It says it is similar in shape to recent African skulls, as well as the European skulls from the Upper Paleolithic period. And it's talking about from the published paper, Nature paper, it points to basal Eurasians resemble Africans or the Paleolithic Europeans. So here's a artist's rendition, a very famous archaeologist who likes to paint how these ancient peoples look. And so this is what a upper Paleolithic person would look like in that time period. And so this is a good example of what a basal Eurasian would look like. And here are more art, by the way, down below is the artist's name if you want to look him up. This is a Upper Paleolithic Girl by Tom Bajolin. He's Swedish, I believe. So I don't speak Swedish, but this is by Tom. I'll look him up. Again, here are more of his renditions of Upper Paleolithic peoples like the basal Eurasians. And here's another image. Reconstruction of European Paleolithic girls playing with their dolls. And to me, I would say, phenotype-wise, dark skinned, brown, dark hair, kind of like a dark brunette or black hair texture. Hair texture-wise, it seems to be a bit wavy, a bit woolly. And yeah, dark eyes, nose is a bit wide. So very interesting. So basal Eurasians basically look like present-day modern Africans. Once basal Eurasians or haplogroup E entered Africa, they could have lived in any of the locations that birthed Proto-Afroasiatic. So again, this includes places like the Horn of Africa, as we covered in the past. This includes Eastern Sahara. This includes North Africa. Like I said, before you use these models, we need to keep in mind that I believe that haplogroup E men lived specifically in the Levant/North African region, or they could have migrated from either of those other locations, like the Horn of Africa or Eastern Sahara. But we're going to actually keep our focus slightly on the Levant and North Africa. Like the Natufians, as an example, the Neolithic Levantines. Remember, our goal is to figure out the ancestors of the ancient Israelites. First, from a genetic level, we know that the Israelites are Afroasiatic and Semitic people. Because when we look at the line of Shem, and of course, when we look at Semitic being part of Afroasiatic, and of course, linguistically, Paleo-Hebrew, the Hebrew language, the very language of the Israelites, is a Semitic language. And scripturally, according to their own writings, they say they come from Shem. Therefore, knowing the origins of Afroasiatic and Semites is important. Also, I'm providing the best case scenario for the origins of Israel's ancestors based on the latest genetic and linguistic studies. The Natufians, which are Neolithic Levantines, are the best candidate for the ancestors of Proto-Afroasiatic. Proto-Afrosan speakers can be identified with high probability with the creators of the Natufian and post-Natufian early Neolithic archaeological culture of the Levant. The identification of Proto-Afrosans as Natufians, and by the way, we went over Proto-Afrosans when it came to the basal Eurasians. But anyways, the identification of Proto-Afrosans as Natufians and post-Natufians seems to satisfy all the four criteria. Besides the farming lexicon, there are sets of reconstructed Proto-Afrosan terms pointing to the inceptant animal breeding. Finally, the Levant appears to be an attested region from where populations began to spread, starting in the early Neolithic, covering not only wide tracts of Southwestern Asia, but also the adjacent parts of the Mediterranean and Africa. And so this paper actually goes specifically into the pre-pottery A and pre-pottery B. So it says, in 2005, the 2005 book, First Farmers of Origins of the Agricultural Societies by Peter Bellwood provides an excellent resource for linguists who wish to explore the worldwide correlation between the origins of agriculture and the expansion of languages. Prior to the adoption of agriculture in Southwestern Asia and elsewhere in the world, for that matter, the human tribe practiced hunter-gathering techniques in order to survive. And the evolution of agriculture in West Asia generally follows a series of cultural transitions that begin with the Natufians, followed by the pre-pottery Neolithic A and pre-pottery Neolithic B, and then finally the development of pottery itself. The Natufians stand as an important cultural transition because they were the last hunter-gatherers in the Middle East. The Natufians appeared near the Sea of Galilee in what is now present-day Israel. The Afroasiatic language family consists of 376 languages. These languages are distributed throughout the Middle East, as well as in North Africa, East Africa, and West Central Africa. Afroasiatic is subdivided into 6 main branches: Egyptian, Semitic, Cushitic, Chadic, Omotic, and Berber. Long-standing opinion among linguists places the prehistoric origins of Afroasiatic languages somewhere in East Africa. Interestingly, linguistic data may also support this model of Afroasiatic origins. Some linguistic reconstruction by Milivavi presents a Proto-Afroasiatic lexicon of farming technology. Based on the reconstruction, he suggests that the Natufians, agriculture, and Afroasiatic co-evolved in Southwestern Asia. Finally, another reason for identifying Southwest Asia as the putative homeland of Afroasiatic languages is the Y chromosome data as presented below in section 4 and 5. So basically, the reason that we read this is to show that Natufians are a pre-pottery Neolithic A and B culture of the Levant, and they are likely the origins of the Proto-Afroasiatic language. So that's why we read this. So Natufians, being a Neolithic people, were the ones who spread haplogroup E from the Levant into all the known Afroasiatic lands. And here, this goes specifically into the Y DNA. So focusing on the green cluster, figure 5.5.4 reflects that mutations within this cluster are variants of the E-Z827 haplogroup. An interesting study from 2016 of lizards was able to extract 3 ancient DNA samples from the Natufian archaeological site in Israel. As the reader may recall from section 2 above, the Natufians were the last hunter-gatherers of Southwest Asia. Two of the samples belonging to E-PF1961, which is ancestral marker for E-M34. E-M34 mutation has a wide distribution currently found in populations of Mediterranean Europe, Southeastern Europe, and the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Africa. For linguists, the E-M34 mutation is significant as it represents a potential back to Africa marker that co-expanded from Southwest Asia into East Africa with goat and sheep herders about 6,000 years ago. This Neolithic migration, as the reader may recall from section 3, appears to have carried Afroasiatic languages from Southwest Asia to East and North Africa. The ancient Natufian Y-DNA data, as just presented, supports this position because the E-PF1961 mutation is an upstream marker for E-M34. Thus, E-M34 probably evolved in the Middle East. Additionally, analysis of contemporary genetic data also supports Middle Eastern and agricultural origins for Afroasiatic languages in Eastern Africa. And currency at 2014 suggests that E-M34 arose in the Levant based on their interpretation of the data and wider distribution of this marker outside of Africa. Additionally, Chlamydis, 2008, date the E-M123 mutation in the Middle East to about 11,000 years ago, which potentially places the evolution of the downstream E-M34 mutation during the Southwest Asian Neolithic. And so this paper right here, again, it supports the idea that Natufians are the ancestors of the Afroasiatic languages and spread Afroasiatic throughout the Levant during the Neolithic period. So it says, this language family consists of 6 branches, 5 including ancient Egyptian confined to North Africa, 1 Semitic, also extending in ancient times to Southwest Asia, and distribution suggests an African origin for the family, whose Semitic branch might then have spread into Southwest Asia. But the overwhelming archaeological attests flow of domesticated crops and animals from the Neolithic times onward into Egypt and through the Arabian Peninsula into Ethiopia is out of Southwest Asia rather than out of Africa. That would make it surprising for Semitic languages to have spread against that stream. There are 2 principal competing hypotheses for the origin of Afroasiatic. One based on reconstruction of early vocabulary for the cultural and environmental referments places the homeland in the Levant during the earliest Neolithic, with the subsequent 2 prolonged spreads by 5,000 BC that is well documented archaeologically. Mixed farming across the Nile into Egypt and North Africa, giving rise to the Egyptian and the Berber branches of Afroasiatic and the sheep and goat-based pastoralism from Western Arabia across the Red Sea into Ethiopia and Sudan, giving rise to the Cushitic, Omotic, and Chadic branches. Semitic spread into Ethiopia much later. That Southwest Asian origin would now be marked by language replacement in the homeland, including the spread of the Semitic branch of Afroasiatic, including Akkadian and Babylonian, Aramaic, and Arabic in historic times. So basically, again, this paper is saying that it's likely that Proto-Afroasiatics emerged from the Levant in the Middle East rather than emerging in Africa. And of course, during this same time period where we see this emergence of Afroasiatic is the same time period that we see E migrating in the Levant. It says in this paper, the role of the Levant in the Neolithic dispersal of the E31B-M35 sublineages is supported by the data. And again, here is a paper. Here's a good representation of the spread from the Fertile Crescent. And then here's a good representation, again, of the spread from the Fertile Crescent, but through language. And here's a good representation, again, showing haplogroup E, the spread of Afroasiatic from the Levant. And here's another representation of modern-day Africa with haplogroup E and Afroasiatic languages. Everything pretty much overlaps each other perfectly. And again, there's a video that shows the migration of the Afroasiatic languages, but I'm not going to show it. I showed it last time. And again, there's also a video that shows the spread of haplogroup E from the Levant. I'm not going to show it because I already showed it, but y'all can look up those 2 videos. Again, it's called The History of Afroasiatic Languages. You can look it up on YouTube. And this one is E-M35 Expansion Hypothesis. Y'all can look up those 2 videos. So it's been well established that Afroasiatics are connected with Y chromosome haplogroup E. This paper literally deals with this fact that Afroasiatics would have been, the ancient Afroasiatics would have carried haplogroup E. It says the Proto-Afroasiatic groups carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population population groups, including current speakers of the Afroasiatic languages and the pastoralist populations. Now, this is important because haplogroup E1B1B, as well as haplogroup E1B1A, their father is E-P2. So technically speaking, both E1B1A, E1B1B are Afroasiatic peoples. When it comes to the frequency of haplogroup E1B1B in select Afroasiatic speakers, here it shows that from 16% to 100%, Berbers have haplogroup E. From 0% to 13%, Chadics have haplogroup E. From 25% to 100%, Cushitic people have haplogroup E. From 30% to 80%, Omotic people have haplogroup E. And from 7% to 93%, Semitic speakers have haplogroup E. The most common the most commonly cited genetic marker in recent decades has been the Y chromosome, which is passed from father to son along paternal lines in unmixed form, and therefore gives a relatively clear definition of one human line of descent from common ancestors. There is a high frequency of haplogroup E1B1B in select Afroasiatic speakers. Christopher Ehret and Shomok Mark Kinnitz have suggested that the geography of the E1B1B lineages coincides with the distribution of Afroasiatic languages, and this is actually what you actually can visually see. The perfect lineup of the Afroasiatic languages and the haplogroup E marker. And again, here's yet again another paper that supports what I'm saying, that haplogroup E is Afroasiatic. It says haplogroup E1B1B, formerly known as E3B, represents the last major direct migration from Africa into Europe. E1B1B lineages are closely related to the diffusion of Afroasiatic languages. And again, here's just another visual representation. So as we know, the ancestors of Israel go back to Afroasiatic people because they are Semitic. As we covered over and over again, we have to keep this in mind. They're Semitic, they're Afroasiatic. Their genealogy goes back to Shem. So now let's turn our attention to the ancestors of Proto-Semitic people. This will lead us to the closest understanding when it comes to Israel's ancestors on a genetic level. Remember, we're trying to look for Israel's ancestors, the men before Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this paper makes an additional inference, since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reasons to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. It seems like the best consensus for the origins of Proto-Semites are the Natufians. And it says craniometric analysis has suggested an affinity between the Natufians and populations of North or Sub-Saharan Africa, a result that finds some support from Y chromosome analysis, which shows that the Natufians and successor Levantine Neolithic populations carried haplogroup E of likely ultimate African origin, which has not been detected in other ancient males from West Asia. Such a scenario this is another paper, such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. So basically, when it comes to the ancient ancestors of the Israelites, from what I see, they likely would have carried haplogroup E if Proto-Semites descend from Natufians. So early Proto-Semites seem to have a very strong link with Africa, both genetically but also linguistically. I believe we can actually prove this biblically, but I'll do that in another presentation. But this book actually goes into it when it comes to the linguistic grounds of things. It says Greenberg determined that Semitic languages really form only one of 6 or more branches of a much larger language family, Afroasiatic. Even the Semitic subfamily itself is mainly African, 12 of its 19 surviving languages being confined to Ethiopia. This suggests that Afroasiatic languages arose in Africa and that only one branch of them spread to the Near East. Hence, it may have been Africa that gave birth to the languages spoken by the authors of the Old and New Testaments and the Quran, the moral pillars of Western civilization. And Christopher Ehret actually even says that after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. So it does seem to be a consensus that, early Semites, the most early and ancient Semitic type was African. When it comes to the origins of the Semitic languages, there's a Bayesian model that proves that Semitic, the language type, originated in the Levantine region, and this is important for several reasons. So it says that I'm actually going to begin right. Actually, I'll bring it at the top. The evolution of languages provides a unique opportunity to study human population history. The origin of Semitic and the nature of the dispersal by Semitic-speaking populations are of great importance to our understanding of the ancient history of the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Our statistical test of our alternative Semitic histories supports an initial divergence of Akkadian from ancestral Semitic over competing hypotheses. An African origin of Semitic, we estimate an early Bronze Age origin for Semitic approximately 5,750 years ago in the Levant. The further proposed that contemporary Ethio-Semitic languages of Africa reflect a single introduction of early Ethio-Semitic form, Southern Levant, Southern Arabia, approximately 2,800 years ago. And so that was like the abstract that summarizes everything. So I'm not going to read the Semitic origins, but basically what it says is what I basically just said, that Semitic likely originated in the Levant, and that Afroasiatic originated in Africa, and Semitic came from Afroasiatic going through the Levant. So this Afroasiatic link in the Red Sea resembles the link of haplogroup E around the Red Sea as well. We went over this paper that deals with it. I'm actually going to begin at the top. It says, a branching in the network may once again represent an episode of human migration that carried the haplogroup E-M35 and its sub-haplogroups further to the west coast of the Red Sea, to Yemen, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, and concurrently down to southern Africa as part of a more recent Y chromosome motivated out of African migration episode. And so it says right here that the arrival of the E-M35 and derived subclades, for example, E-M123-E-M34 to Arabia, appears to have been strongly linked to the expansion into Eastern Africa, North Africa, Europe, Southern Africa, an event that is likely related to pastoralism. So I'm going to stop right there. So basically, I read this section because it lines up with the idea of Afroasiatic and Semites having this Levantine Red Sea type of origin. And so here's like a good map showing specifically E-M123, with it pretty much dominating the Middle East and going a little bit into Ethiopia and also into North Africa and into the southern Southern Europe. All right, but back to the study on the origins of Semitic languages. The Semitic people seem to have emerged from local Neolithic Levantines. This, of course, would mean that the first Semites would have had haplogroup E, because haplogroup E was one of the haplogroups of Neolithic Levantines. Just to make that thoroughly clear. I'm going to actually begin down here. It says the presence of ancient members of the two oldest Semitic groups, East and West Semitic, in the same region of the Levant, combined with a possible long interval, 100 to 3,000 years between the origin of Semitic and the appearance of Akkadian in Sumer, suggests a Semitic origin in the Northeast Levant and a later movement of Akkadian eastward into Mesopotamia and Sumer. So Semitic being originally being in the Levant matches with, of course, what we see, that this finding contrasts with both earlier Neolithic and Epipaleolithic Levantine populations that were dominated by haplogroup E. So it's likely that these early Akkadians that are coming from Semitic populations of the Levant would have carried haplogroup E. Because it says, we estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by the expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. So it is believed by many that the early Proto-Semitic peoples carried haplogroup E. As I said earlier, it can be postulated that select M35 carriers, speakers from Africa of a stage of ancestral Semitic, pre-Proto-Semitic, entered the Near East. And again, it says early pre-Proto-Semitic speakers would have migrated into Syro-Palestine before the Neolithic, being taken by their M35 bearers, specifically M35/78. And again, E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. The early Semites carried haplogroup E if the Semitic language originated from the Levant. If the Semites are descendants of Neolithic Levantines, which only had haplogroup E. Furthermore, we see haplogroup E throughout the Levant, even after the Neolithic era, in known Semitic civilizations and people. So here's actually a map of various ancient E clades that we found in archaeology, and here's a map of the area of Natufian culture. So we found various branches or remains of E in places like the Jordan. Here's a good map that shows it. Here's another map that shows it in northern Israel. These are remains that we've found. Here's another map in northern Israel. Again, these are haplogroup E remains that we have found. Here's another one. This one is specifically from the Middle Late Bronze Age. So this is after the Neolithic period. We're still finding E. And Hazar. Hazar is actually a biblical name in the Bible. You can find the city of Hazar. Here's a Middle Late Bronze Age sample of haplogroup E in Megiddo, another famous biblical name, found with two brothers. And here's a haplogroup E, actually a DE we find in Syria. And here's another clade of E we find in Turkey or Anatolia, which is further north. Again, is another haplogroup E we find in Syria, in Ebla, which is another very famous city, very important. I'll go into why. Ebla was one of the earliest kingdoms in Syria. I.J. Gilib considered Ebla as part of the Kish civilization, which was a cultural entity of Eastern Semitic-speaking populations that stretched from the center of Mesopotamia to the Western Levant. Eblaite Paleo-Syrian is an extinct Semitic language which was used during the 3rd millennium BCE by the populations of northern Syria. It was named after the ancient city of Ebla in modern western Syria. And Eastern Semitic languages are one of the 3 divisions of the Semitic languages. The Eastern Semitic group is attested by 3 distinct languages: Akkadian, Eblaite, and Kishite, all of which have been long extinct. So when we see an ancient clade of E 4,600 years ago in this ancient Semitic city of Ebla, that's an indicator that, yeah, it would seem that early Semites had E. Here's a study that deals with a specific location in, was it in Akalon or something like that, during the 2nd millennium BC, but it's in northern Israel. And basically, here it is right here. Here's an actual visual representation. It was occupied before 2000 BC when the first palace was built and likely destroyed in the 12th century BC and never reoccupied. But what we found in this city is some, again, haplogroup E. 2 different ones, I think from a family, actually. But anyways, focusing on Proto-Semites, they would have expanded from the Levant into places like Mesopotamia. We actually can see a trail of this migration through DNA. So it says in this paper that E-123 originated some 19,000 years ago during the late Ice Age. Its place of origin is uncertain, but it was probably in the Red Sea region, somewhere between the southern Levant and Ethiopia. Its main subclade, E-M34, most probably emerged in the Levant about 15,000 years ago. Soon afterward, M34 split into 2 branches, M84 and Z841, which were probably found in the Fertile Crescent during the Neolithic period. E-M34 lineages experienced a much more dramatic expansion during the Chalcolithic Copper Age period. The downstream of CTS 1096, the Y14891, and the Z21018 clades are typically found among people of Jewish ancestry, while PF6391 and Z21421 are found in the Levant in places like Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and the Arabian Peninsula. F1382 appeared to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula, where it is almost exclusively found today. That could be Ishmael for all we know. But anyways, so here's a good representation again of haplogroup E slowly making its way from the Levant into Mesopotamia. Here are the ancient clades of it, are the ancient time periods in which it existed, it appeared. Again, here are the people who have it today. And we see it making its way slowly into Mesopotamia. And here are the modern descendants of this specific clade. Again, moving from the Levant into Mesopotamia, Euphrates and Tigris River. The modern descendants are over here. And yet again, here's just another visual representation. All the dots you see are, people remains that we found with haplogroup E. Specifically, the green dots being PPNA and the red dots being PPNB. So I believe haplogroup E is the best. I believe haplogroup E is the Y-DNA of Proto-Semitic people. The groups that would have expanded haplogroup E into Mesopotamia would have been Eastern Semitic speakers such as the Akkadians and others. And I'll let Yeshua take on this while I take a sip of water.
All right, I'm going to read this, but I just want to notate that I didn't see any haplogroup J in any of those ancestral specimens that you shared with us tonight.
No, not there yet. It's not there.
Right. All right. So EM34 doesn't come close to predominating anywhere, but is most prominent in southern Levant, Cyprus, Ethiopia, and the Jewish diaspora, with significant appearance in Kurdistan, the South Caucasus, Arabia, Iberia, Italy, Egypt, and the Maghreb. M34's direct ancestor, EZ830, which unites it with the major East African Cushitic lineage, was found this past year in Natufian samples from northern Israel. But IIRC EM34's earliest attestation in the record is in the PPMB individual from Ain Ghazal and Jordan. A bit earlier, one of its major subclades, EM84, was identified in the Iron Age individuals from Armenia. A Levantine origin seems probable. A few years ago, it was pretty common to see people identifying EM34 using a combination with JP58 as a marker of the Proto-Semites. But it's become obvious from the distribution that the truth is hairier. EM34 has left a trail all areas of the Mediterranean, East Africa, and highland West Asia, where it's unlikely that Semitic languages were ever spoken. Naturally, this year's DNA findings seem to confirm some link between early Semitic-speaking populations and EM34. EM34 is epipaleolithic, which puts the divergent time of the major subclade EL791 and EM84 around the chronologically estimated dawn of Proto-Semitic and the Chalcolithic or early Bronze.
Yep. So, as E-M34 was found in Bronze Age Armenia samples, it is possible that Semitic or Afroasiatic languages were spoken in Armenia and the Caucasus at some point. That's actually an important point. So far we have two E-M84 samples, Rise 416 and Rise 423 from Nekarin Genet Shenin in Armenia, which date back to the Middle Bronze Age. Given the age of these samples, it's possible these individuals paternal ancestors hailed from neighboring Mesopotamia and arrived in the region with Syrian traders, who in turn were descended from the Akkadians. This might hold true for at least one of the two samples. So here are two samples that we find, two E samples that we find in Middle Bronze Age Armenia that are believed to possibly be Akkadians, and Akkadians are Semitic people, because there was an Akkadian like expansion. All right, so it says that E-M35 originating in the ancestral homeland of Afroasiatic in East Africa, and thus the homeland of Proto-Semitic. E-M35 is the major founding lineage of all Semitic people in this hypothesis. E-M34 was the founding lineage of East Semitic people as the first wave Neolithic Chalcolithic period out of Africa distribution to southern Arabia and Mesopotamia, either through North Africa and the Levant, or was often postulated before the 2016 Natufian ancient DNA findings across the Mandeb Strait, the 400-kilometer stretch of water between the tip of East Africa and Yemen. Thus, E-M34 would have been one of the founding lineages of the East Semitic Akkadian people and language. The first wave the first wave might be related to the Natufian settlement in the Levant, or more likely followed shortly after the success of their migration. Edeshem 34 people in this hypothesis are descended from the same ancestral people group as the Natufians, who lived in the East African Proto-Semitic tribal homeland before migrating into the Levant. Natufians, northern Israel, 10,000 YBP, Jordanians, Dead Sea, Ethiopia. This is the people who, by the way, link with Natufians. Jordanians, Ethiopian Amhara, Ethiopian Jews, Sahara, Mauritania, Algerian Kabalis, Ethiopian Waluta, Yemen, Ethiopian Oromo, Izumrum, Turkish, Ammonite, and Bedouins. What is needed to verify or falsify the hypothesis of the Edeshem 34 as Akkadian is the distribution among Iraqi and Kurdish populations, and especially ancient DNA from skeletons found in scientific excavations of Akkadian sites in Mesopotamia. M78, actually, I'll let Yeshu read this one. He'll like this one.
Start at the top, EM 35?
Yeah, Edeshem 78.
Oh, okay, I see where you're at. EM 78 was a major founding lineage of West Semitic people and Northern Egyptian lower classes, slaves, workers, shepherds. EM 78 is an indicator of a second wave out of Africa of Proto-Semitic people during the early Bronze Age. This most definitely was not just one haplogroup, but included many. Y-DNA EM78 is a good migration indicator for this second wave. A significant majority of Jewish families with traditions of descent from King David are found in EM78, a lineage that underwent a severe ancient extinction event in the conquest, exilic, and Roman periods. History indicates that there would likely have been very few survivors of this lineage, but a discussion that belongs to a different thread, though. Powerful.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, there is a belief that that King David would have had E because they're his descendants. We do find a lot of his descendants with E, but again, we're trying to stay neutral and understand the ancestors of Proto-Semites. So let's go back. Said, I do find it interesting that when it comes to the priestly Kohan lineage from the tribe of Levi, it's been found that, however, the biggest and the most important Samaritan family, the Kohanim family, tradition tribe of Levi, was found to belong to haplogroup E. This article predated the change of the classification of haplogroup E3B1-M78 to E3B1A M78, and the further subdivision of E3B1A M78 into 6 subclades based on the research of Clarinard. So basically, it's likely that the tribe of Levi, the Levites, could have had a haplogroup E marker, since we're dealing with the Kohanim Samaritans. And what's interesting about this is that when it comes to Samaritan Levites, they have 100% haplogroup E. And, well, And now when it comes to Arabs and other, ethnic groups around the Levantine region, there are also a lot of high percentages of haplogroup E. And then when it comes to, and also here's the references. And when it comes to like other haplogroups, it's 0 to only like 20%. Anyways, As far as the discussion above, the Natufian ancient DNA tests into E-P2 and E-Z830 is the strongest link we have to the origins of Eastern Semitic, and per my hypothesis above, and would then suggest E-P2, E-Z830, E-M123, and E-M34 are the founding Y-DNA haplogroups of the Akkadian and East Semitic. What's powerful about this is that E1B1A and E1B1E, E1B1A and E1B1B both descend from E-P2. So technically speaking, E1B1A could also be Semitic. I, of course, covered geneticists who believe that the Akkadians had haplogroup E. So let me go into that. For instance, Peter Solomon, as we've spoken of in the past, said that it is possible that Northwest Semitic Hebrew people in the languages dispersed into the Levant from Northeast Africa, Nile Valley region around 5000 BCE. Thus, the earliest out of Africa settlement of the Proto-Semitic people was likely in Yemen on the southeastern region of the Arabian Peninsula. They then spread to the east and northeast to enter Mesopotamia and found that Semitic kingdom of Akkad and the Akkadian people. In this group, many of us conclude that haplogroup E is one of the major founding haplogroups of the Semitic people, and that haplogroup E people were the ones who brought Proto-Semitic languages out of the Afroasiatic homeland in Northeast Africa into the Levant and Mesopotamia. So there are a lot of people who do subscribe to haplogroup E being Proto-Semitic. And again, here's his credentials. So let's actually place our attention on the Akkadians, since Akkadians are the most ancient Semitic population. Where did they come from, and who are their ancestors? A recent paper came out on this topic of the Akkadians. So, Akkadians' nomadic origins have generally been assumed. Thus, the origins of pastoralism, nomadicism, must be sought in the context of mixed farming within the Fertile Crescent, specifically during the PPNB, or pre-Pottery Neolithic B. The Akkadians seem to have moved into the northern Arabia steppe and desert, Jezera and Mahida during the mid-7th millennium BC. The PP and B/C populations apparently began intensive herding at the end of that period, and maintained ties to the Fertile Crescent, seen in both exotic trade and everyday culture. Archaeological sequences in the Arabian desert suggest that the Akkadians probably were of a West Semitic Levantine background. And so it says in this paper, to the early Euphrates and beyond, it says, finally, many scholars have repeated and affirmed the old hypothesis that Semitic populations arose in the periodic waves from the desert in the inundated exiting sanitary populations in the Mesopotamian Alevun. If we again turn our attention to the nature and distribution of PP and B sites in the desert, we can see that occupation spread in the north to south direction, and that the PP and B culture represented the apparent initial attempt at resettling the desert regions after the end of the Upper Paleolithic to Epipaleolithic. And here's the Levantine which is basically, but anyways, culture manifestation solidify expansion of the early had perhaps begun in the Natufian and PPNA periods. The PP was defined in the Sub-Levant at Jericho. Basically, to sort of sum this up, is that that these police come from PP peoples, and people is Tufian. Are which are Tufians. Therefore, there's a high probability that Akkadian, which makes sense to the thing that we know.
You're starting
Of course,
to break
here's
up,
the
brother.
Of the Neolithic. Let me see.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the video on the various social media platforms. I told you, man, the young phenom is at work, man. I told you the brother's a savant, back-to-back slides, back-to-back citations, back-to-back sources of nothing but heat rock, man. Hit that like button, and the brother's bringing strong arguments for haplogroup E being the Proto-Semitic people. If you haven't seen the video last night, I advise you to watch it right after this one. You don't want to miss the following, because the brother's going to bring more PowerPoint presentations on this subject. Go ahead, brother.
Am I clear?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I had a switch. All right, so area of the Natufian culture, and here is PP and sites. Much we're dealing with the same. I'm just visual, beginning all the way from the southern Levant, all the way up to the northern Levant, or what is today Syria. And as we covered before, that Natufians are a pre-pottery Neolithic A, pre-pottery Neolithic B people. Do this so that you can we've been over. And remember, Natufians carried haplogroup, just so y'all can remember. I'm not going to reread it all, just as visual. So now going back to the paper, Akkadian, the ancestors are or the Akkadians came from fits the linguistic model for the origins of Semitic languages and the expansion of Akkadian. Now, linguistically, Akkadian is recognized as belonging to the Semitic family of languages, and a cuneiform text that people speaking Akkadian were Welsh in the Olavun by the early dynastic 2 through 3 periods. The center of the political control in Akkad was often considered to be Kish, based on our interpretation of the Sumerian king list. Gleb has suggested that the civilizational aspect of the period between 2700 BC and 2400 BC in Akkad should be labeled Kish civilization. The Akkadians can certainly be seen as a Martu predecessors in the 5th and 4th millennia BC, and perhaps Gelb's early Kish rulers, such as Scorpion, Fish, and Dog, may represent the earliest stratum from the 6th millennium BC. Since we have PPNB populations in Western Iraq as early as the late 7th millennium BC and the earliest Umbud settlements of Akkad and Kish, we do not antedate Sia 5500 BC. it would be safe to conclude that Semitic nomadic pastoralists began to settle the northern Alavun from the western desert and interact with other populations as early as the 7th millennium BC, and that early Semitic populations came from regions to the west of the central Euphrates Valley and mountain massifs such as Jebel Bereshir. And again, here's the model again that deals with the languages that, you know, Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, and the Akkadians brought it into Mesopotamia. So all this kind of like makes sense. And again, it's likely that these Akkadians bringing Semitic languages into Mesopotamia also were the ones that brought haplogroup E into Mesopotamia as well, since this is all happening around the same time. And again, here's just a map of E throughout the Middle East. So putting all this information together, the Neolithic Levantines, who are the ancestors of Proto-Semitic population, such as the Akkadians, came from the Levant and went into Mesopotamia. They were likely the ones who carried haplogroup E into these regions and the Semitic language. Let's put everything together. Now, I don't believe Abraham and the ancestors of Abraham was Akkadian. But I do believe Abraham was distantly related to Akkadians. I believe that Abraham's ancestors would have been like West Semitic speaking peoples. But more importantly, Abraham, according to his genealogy, comes from Shem. Therefore, he goes back to Proto-Semites, which descend from Natufians. So genetically speaking, Abraham and his descendants would also have haplogroup E. And of course, the Israelites themselves would also have haplogroup E, and their descendants would, if we're using logic. So genotype-wise, Proto-Semites likely had haplogroup E, but phenotype-wise, what did Proto-Semites look like? So now we pretty much know as an established fact using logic that Proto-Semites are E carriers. But, you know, what do these Semites look like? At least the Proto-Semites, the most ancient variant of a Semite. What would that be? Now I'm going to provide the best case scenario for the phenotype of Proto-Semites and therefore the ancestors of ancient Israelites, which means we need to go back to the ancestors of Semites themselves. How did they look? We know Proto-Semites descend from Natufians, as shown in this paper that I've read before. Semites descend from the Natufian population. It's believed that Semitic features developed from the Natufians. So there is a conclusion that when it comes to the Natufian phenotype, that the racial stock, when it comes to the navel bridge, that it's very similar to Semitic. It says, especially remarkable was the nasal development of this cave people, often almost Negro-like in the flattening of the nasal bridge and in the width of the interorbital septum, such as might herald the pronounced nasal development of later Semitic races. Sir Arthur Keith even goes as far as to say that Natufians are the ancestors of the biblical Arabs and Semites. It says Negro people of 5000 BC, unknown among modern race, described by Keith. He says down here, they were clearly a Negroid people, said Sir Arthur, with wide faces, flat noses, and long, large heads. They may have been the ancestors of Arabs or Semites of biblical times, in Sir Arthur Keith's opinion. In addition to these riddles, Sir Arthur pronounced another linking them unaccountably to ancient of the Chaldees and the prehistoric man of South Africa. By a strange coincidence, he said that the time of burnt remains came to me. Leonard Woodley sent a box of human remains from under the foundation of these burnt bones from of about the 3rd dynasty also represented not ordinarily cremation of dead bodies clothed with flesh, but cremation of dried bones in the remains of women's bones were preponderated. Several features stand out quite definitively. Were a long-headed people. They resembled the pre-dynastic Egyptians. Thirdly, their faces were short and wide. Fourthly, they were promactinous with projecting jaws. Fifthly, their nasal bones were not narrow and high, but formed a wide, low arch. And so here's like the skull classifications and how it works. So African Americans and Negro people tend to have like a long skull, and you often heard me say that a lot. And they're promactinous, which means that their jaw comes out more and their nasal cavity is open, and that's what gives us the wide nose. So it seems to be clear to me that Natufians had more like an African type of feature. Here's another paper that goes in Natufians. It says that it seems like that the Natufian skull, based on its skull, that had a type of like African ancestry, like a recent African ancestry, based on their skulls that we found. And this as well from Keith basically says that, but with a distinct bias towards the African variety of that stock represented by the pre-dynastic people of Egypt, still observed by many Negro tribes in Africa, they remove one of or both upper central incensors and youth. So there, some of the practices also of the Natufian seems to be quote unquote African. And so when it comes to description of Natufians and PPN remains, PPN being pre-pottery Neolithic remains, consistently reports that among other features consists with sub-Saharan African ancestry. Basically, pre-pottery Neolithic remains seem to have a type of sub-Saharan African ancestry, seem to look and appear African, essentially. The latest study on the Natufian features basically classifies Natufians being very similar to Niger-Congo populations. I actually read this last time. I read the abstract and the conclusion. So it is a further surprise that the Epipaleolithic Natufian of Israel, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. So here it is. Niger-Congo is linked with Natufian. They're sort of linked together. And Natufian falls also smack in between Niger-Congo and prehistoric / recent Northeast Africa. So like right in between. So the conclusion is, if the late Epiocene Natufian sample from Israel is the source from which that Neolithic spread was derived, then there was clearly a sub-Saharan African element present of almost equal importance in the late prehistoric Eurasian element. So facial reconstruction of the Natufians basically confirmed that Natufians looked sub-Saharan African. There's a Natufian right up next to common. I believe that, it's a pretty good, one of the best, examples of what a Natufian would look like as he's, farming in the ancient Levant. Anyways, the ancestors of Proto-Semites would have looked like Natufians. Natufians looked African, so the ancestors of Proto-Semites had an Africoid look, in my opinion. This would include Abraham's ancestors and the ancestors of Israel, of course, the most ancient, in ancient times. Now, although Natufians are the ancestors of Proto-Semites, did Proto-Semites keep the facial features and body proportions of their Natufian predecessors? I believe Natufians had the closest features to a Proto-Semite, those that remained unadmixed. With that being said, let's shift our attention specifically on Proto-Semites, such as the Akkadians. Akkadians being one of the earliest Semitic populations, Semitic populations are a great reference. However, what did Akkadians and Proto-Semites look like? Do we have any remains of ancient Semitic people? First we need to learn what locations did Proto-Semites settle and what are ancient Semitic cities that we can look at as an example. So again, Akkadians went to Mesopotamia. So let's shift our attention to Mesopotamia. So when it comes to the Akkadians, it's said that one of the places that they settled was Umbud. It says down below, since we have PPNB populations in Western Iraq as early as the late 7th millennium BC and the earliest Umbud settlements of Akkad and Kish. So let's look at Umbud. Let's first look at Umbud since it's one of the earliest settlements of the Akkadians. Now, have we excavated Umbud? Yes. Do we have remains from people from Umbud? Yes. So what do these people in Umbud look like? So this is a paper dealing with the remains of the Umbud civilization. It says the people resemble for the people responsible for the Al-Umbud stage of culture belonged to judge by their distribution to the Middle Eastern sect of the Mediterranean race, to the brown race of Professor Elliot Smith. In fact, but to their language, we cannot say anything. We cannot say nothing. As to the characteristics of the dolichocephalic population of Mesopotamia, Dr. Bullockston distinguishes a brown Mediterranean and a brown Eurafrican type. They are in fact often included together in the term Mediterranean. As distinguished by Dr. Bullockston, the brown Mediterranean variety seems later and related with the West, whereas the Eurafrican type seems more ancient and has connections with the East. Brown Eurafrican variety of the dolichocephalic population at Kish, the other variety, the brown Mediterranean type, which is related with the West, can hardly have been anything but Semitic, for it is certain that we have to account for Mediterranean Semites from Arabia at an early date in Mesopotamia. So basically, they're saying that these early Semitic types are like a brown Eurafrican. Remains were called the Middle Eastern Mediterranean race, the brown race, the brown Mediterranean race, the brown Eurafrican race. What are these classifications? Can these classifications give us an idea as to how these people would have looked? Sergi argued that the Mediterranean race had in fact originated in Africa, probably in the Sahara region, and that it also included a number of dark-skinned peoples from the African continent, such as Ethiopians and Somalis. Sergi also asserted that the Semites were a branch of the Eurafricans who were closely related to the Mediterraneans. So Gustav Sergi's much debated book, The Mediterranean Race, argued that the Mediterranean race had likely originated from a common ancestral population that evolved in the Sahara region or the eastern part of Africa, in the region of the Great Lakes, near the source of the Nile, including Somaliland, and which later spread from there to populate North Africa and the circum-Mediterranean region. The origin of the Mediterranean race, which includes Semites, actually fits the origins for Afroasiatic and haplogroup E. As y'all remember, there is the belief that Semites come from North Africa, And so this Mediterranean race is also believed to come from North Africa. So I think it actually perfectly fits it, as well as haplogroup E coming from North Africa. So the biology, the physical traits, the genetic traits, and the linguistic traits kind of do fit, again, a North African model, if y'all want to like choose that for your belief of the origin of Proto-Semites and Afro-Asiatics. But anyways, let's look further at this classification, such as your African and brown race. So this is from a book that actually deals with it during that time period. It says the Mediterranean race was first defined by Sergi, who also calls it your African. So Mediterranean race and your African is the same thing. If you hear that, Mediterranean race and your African, they're the same thing. The Mediterranean race originated in Africa and is closely related to the Negro, both being long-skulled peoples descended from a common stock, the Euro-African. His actual book, he says, this human species with cranial and facial characters thus well determined, I call Euro-African. And this because having had its origin in Africa. So let's actually get specifically into the biology of the Euro-African. Euro-African, dark hair, rather dark skin, a florid complexion, moderately tall stature, average about 1.678, about 66 inches, very long dolichocephalic head, cheekbones somewhat broad, often slightly prognathous, nose often broad, eyes dark, with rather closely curly hair, prognathism, and smaller measurements. This type, with almost Negroid characters, may be connected with the Grimaldi type. Semites have spread over Southwest Asia, North and East Africa, and elsewhere. The Himyaritic variety may be regarded as a mixed type. The original Jews were a Semitic people, Bedouin, who even in very early times. Actually, I'm not going to read the last part because I'm going to save it for later. But anyways, in a private communication, he asserts that this sequence is correct for Mesopotamia. As for example, at Kish, where the Mediterranean Proto-Semite is under the Sumerian Alpine, he adds that the primitive Mediterranean type equals the Galas, etc., of Somaliland and Kenya colony, which in turn equals the Proto-Semites. So basically what he's saying is that Proto-Semites would have resembled Gala people of Somaliland and Kenya people. Don't know are Oromo people. So if you look up an Oromo, that's probably a good example of what a Proto-Semite would look like. And so again, continuing with the Euro-African type, skin, dark complexion, hair, dark, eyes, dark, head, very long, nose, often broad, prognathism, often slight. So now here's the Mediterranean race. Classical graceful Mediterranean type by Sergi. Stalk, brown, neither white nor negroid nor mixed, skin, brown, lips thin, often slightly thick and fleshy, crude or primitive Mediterranean type, head dolichocephalic, skin medium to dark brown, lips moderately full, often with some aversion, cheekbones medium high, medium wide. It says down here, Proto-Mediterranean type. The term Proto-Mediterranean was proposed by the writer in 1932 to replace the monstrous term Proto-Semitic, which was based on the linguistic connotation. So I'll let Yashub take this one really quick while I get a sip of water.
All right. Racial characters in ancient India. Examination of a skull from Daro, a site of the Indus Valley civilization in northern India, by Dr. Wilton M. Krogman of the University of Chicago. It is stated in a communication circulated by Science Service of Washington has demonstrated a combination of characters more usually to be assigned to diverse racial types. His conclusion is that it represents a proto Mediterranean type in which ancestral Negro traits have manifested themselves. And he goes on to suggest that the modern Mediterranean race may once have had a mixture of Negroid blood, which has since been eradicated.
All right, and so the Euro-Africans, the ancient Sumerians, the Arabs, and the Dravidians, and other dwellers of the shores of the Indian Ocean, forming a new but very loosely defined entity called the brown race. The reference to the distinctive color of their skin, in reference to their distinctive color of their skin. When Diop observes on the subject of the races of Egypt that Mediterranean is an anthropologist euphemism for Negroid, he is very nearly right. So when you read ancient, 19th century writers talking about someone looks like the Mediterranean type or like a brown race type, really it's kind of synonymous with a Negroid type, because when they're unearthing these skulls, they have these Negroid characteristics and whatnot. And he says the Mediterranean and East African littorals into the whole peninsula of Arabia and the shores of the Persian Gulf. In other words, Syria, Arabia, Mesopotamia, and Sumer were parts of the original domain of the brown race. Proto-Egyptians, but there can be no doubt whatever that their dark hair was associated with dark eyes and bronze complexion. This right here is actually going to what the brown race would have looked like, by the way. Wall pictures and statues with black eyes and ruddy brown skins and irises of the black or dark brown color, as the living population of northeastern Africa, which most likely resembled the Proto-Egyptians in structure, have a copper brown skin color. We must look upon the old Egyptian custom of representing men of their nationality with red skin. And here's the region that this particular author says that the brown race came from, which is the Horn of Africa. And what's interesting about this again is that the Horn of Africa is yet another location where it's believed that Proto-Afroasiatic originated from in haplogroup E, as I've gone over many times. So the biology, the language, and the DNA sort of match another Horn African origin for haplogroup E and Afroasiatic and Proto-Semites, just in case anyone wants to go with this interpretation. Anyways, in conclusion, it seems that the Middle Eastern Mediterranean race, the brown Mediterranean race, the brown Euro-African race, basically represent African-looking peoples, or even Natufian-looking. Particularly when we note once more that Mediterranean is not a synonym for white. Elliot Smith's brown or Mediterranean race being near the mark. Elliot Smith classes these Proto-Egyptians as a branch of what he calls the brown race, which is the same as Sergei's Mediterranean or Euro-African race. The term brown in this context refers to skin color and is simply a euphemism for Negro. And again, when you put it all together, basically what I hear is that these guys just look like Natufians. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Anyways, it makes sense that Proto-Semites, that if Proto-Semites descend from Natufians, and ultimately these classifications seem to fit an African phenotype, which makes sense because Semites have an ancient connection with Africa, as said by Christopher Ehret. After all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. Modern anthropologists seem to say that early West Asians resembled Africans. So again, I believe that these types that I'm showing right here are probably good representations of how these early Semites could have looked. Like, for instance, if they coming from North Africa, they would have looked like a Saharan Ethiopid during the Green Sahara period. Or if they looked like, or if Proto-Semites looked like the Gawa people, then they probably would have looked like an East Ethiopid type, as represented here. And if they looked like the Euro-African type, then they probably, or the Mediterranean race type, then they probably would have looked like a Proto-Ethiopid. So Proto-Semites seem to have looked African, but is there any other ancient Semite sites that we can look into? Another famous Akkadian civilization is Kish. Let's first learn some of the background of the civilization of Kish. So again, linguistically, Akkadian is recognized as belonging to the Semitic family of languages, and analysis of cuneiform texts suggests that the people speaking Akkadian were well established in the Alevum by the early dynastic 2 and 3 periods. The center of political control in Akkad was often considered to be Kish, based on their interpretation of the Sumerian kings list. So now let's look at Kish. So here's a map of Iraq, modern day Iraq. And here's Kish. And here's actually a closer image of Akkad, the region of Akkad. And here's the city of Kish. And this is a map of Iraq showing important sites that were occupied during the Umbud period. So Kish of Sumer in Mesopotamia, Umbud period. And we actually, just talked about Umbud anyways. Kish was occupied from the Umbud period, gaining prominence as one of the preeminent powers in the region during the early dynastic period. The Kish civilization is a time period corresponding to the early East Semitic era in Mesopotamia and the Levant. Coined by Ingris Geb, the epoch began in the early 4th millennium BC. The tradition encompasses the sites of Ebla, we mentioned that earlier, and Mari in the Levant. The Proto-Akkadian sites of Abu Salaha and Kish in central Mesopotamia, which constituted the region as it was known to the Sumerians. The Eastern Semitic population migrated from what is now the Levant and spread into Mesopotamia. The Sumerian city of Kish show an East Semitic nature and revealed that the city population had a strong Semitic component from the dawn of recorded history. Gleb considered Kish to be the center of this civilization, hence the name. And remember, the East Semitic languages includes Kish, as well as Akkadian and Ebelite. Again, here's another map of Akkad, and here's the city of Kish. So now let's get into the biology. Report on the human remains found at Kish. And I'll go ahead and read it. This report on the human remains found at Kish by Field Museum and Oxford expedition is based on the material excavated in the old Sumerian palace of Eastern Kish. All remains from the palace, or in our terminology, Mound A, belong to the period immediately preceding the age of Sargon of Agad, and are contemporary with the last fourth dynasty of Kish, circa 2900 through 2800 BC. The names of the 8 rulers of this period indicate clearly a Semitic dynasty. The population at Kish in the period to which the human remains of the palace belong should be therefore very mixed. Dr. Berkston finds 2 long-headed races in the palace skulls at Kish, which he designates as Euro-African and Mediterranean. And we already went over what a Euro-African and Mediterranean looks like, what their biology is. Remember, they're dark-skinned, dark-eyed, dark-haired. They have a wide nose, and they have a promathous jaw and a long head. And again, same thing for the Mediterranean race. So anyways, a considerable development of the temporal muscles and is often typical in such skulls as those of Australian Aboriginals. So basically, he's saying that the skulls are very similar to Australian Aboriginals. And during this time period, they're trying more so to link the Kish remains to Australians for some reason. Then again, this is before DNA, but they're trying to say that these Kish people sort of look like Australians or they look like Dravidians. And but honestly, also you can say they could look like Negro or Natufian type of peoples as well. But anyways, it says that the forehead was retreating and the brow ridges were often prominent. The cheekbones were rather broad and the nose was broad. In some cases, inclining and extreme platyrium, and that means a white nose. There can be little doubt that this type is that which has been described by Sergey and these other anthropologists, the name Euro-African type. And so just to go over some of the terms, they use the term like Platt-Ryan. Platt-Ryan means white nose. And of course, they also use the term like prognathous, which means, protruding of the jaw. Which, Australians, like he's saying that, they had like Australian cast, but, Australians also can sort of have that same bone structure. But also it's a Negroid structure too. Anyways, there is little hesitation to ascribing this type to the people who have been called by Elliot Smith the brown race. These 2 types both belong to a group of humanity which is classified as a single race by Herodin, who apparently associating the brown race with the Mediterranean race, indicating a further group, the Semites, of whom only one group, the Bedouin, here concerns us. All right. Oops. All right. In any case, up to the present, among the bones from Kish, with 1 or 2 doubtful exceptions, I have not found any definite examples of the people whom Henry Haddon describes as Semites, whereas there are certainly examples of the brown and the Euro-African races on the morphological examination. It would appear that 2 branches of one stock are to be found among the types represented by the skulls from Kish. And again, when they're using all these terms like Mediterranean and Euro-African, it's synonymous with Negro. And so when it comes to the Kish remains, these Kish remains, basically these, Western, or should I say Eastern Semitic types, basically kind of look black, basically. Anyways, The civilization of Kish, a Semitic city, also had the Euro-African, the Mediterranean, and the brown race. These phenotypes are described at Umbud. So two Akkadian early Semitic civilizations have the racial classification which are African-looking. The description of these remains found at Umbud and Kish are similar to Natufian features, perhaps because they descend from Natufians, which is what is believed that Proto-Semites come from. I said, in the past that I've said many times, and Semites come from Natufians, therefore it makes sense that these early Semites are going to look like Natufians. And Akkadian come from the Levant, the homeland of Natufians. Anyways, for visual representation of the early Semites in places like Mesopotamia, we actually have art of them. The Semitic civilization of Mari has murals of its inhabitants. So Mari was an ancient Semitic city-state in modern-day Syria. It flourished as a trade center during 2900 BC and 1759 BC. And so here's actually a map of Mari. And here are the people. They are brown-skinned and dark-haired. Here's a closer image of the people of Mari. Here's another image of inhabitants of Mari from the 2nd millennium BC. Again, ancient Semitic people. Here's another one. And here is another mural. So the Semitic inhabitants of ancient Mari are, the best description I can give them is like medium brown to dark brown skin, black hair, dark eyes. The Semites of Mari, as well as the description of Umbud and Kish, Semitic inhabitants, and also the Natufians, are all a good representation of how Proto-Semites would have looked, and therefore how the ancestors of Abraham would have looked. This is like the idea of how I believe Abraham's ancestors, the Proto-Semites, Arphaxad and all of them would have kind of looked. I give them like a dark skin, dark hair, dark eye type of look to them. So if anyone ever asks me, what I think he looked like, this would be it. This is what I'll kind of go to. So summary time. Providing the best case scenario for the Y-DNA haplogroup of the ancestors of the ancient Hebrews of Israel and their ancestors, we begin with the question, what is a haplogroup? And we know that a haplogroup is basically passed down from father to son through the Y-DNA. And why is Y-DNA important? It's important because according to the male line of Israel, they descend from Arphaxad, the son of Shem. Shem is the father of Semites. Semites are Afro-Asiatic people. Therefore, the ancestors of the Israelites and the Israelites themselves are a Semitic people. And since Semitic is Afro-Asiatic, understanding the origins of Afro-Asiatic is important. Israelites are genetically or ethnically and linguistically Semitic. Haplogroup E seems to be the best candidate. First of all, haplogroup E likely originated in the Middle East and migrated throughout the world, the known world, more than likely by basal Eurasians. And people known as Natufians, who were Neolithic Levantines, are believed to be the ancestors of Proto-Semites. And they would have carried haplogroup E. This paper makes an additional inference since there is archaeological and physical anthropological reasons to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. Such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and in Levantine farmers, a common link between Africa and Europe, between the Levant and Africa. Early Proto-Semites are believed to have had haplogroup E but also Proto-Semites originated in the Levant. We're summarizing everything together. We estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by the expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1B1B and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic peoples in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. Everything linking up to the same time period. Akkadians who expanded from the Levant were descendants of PPNB Levantines. PPNB Levantines are Natufians who, of course, had haplogroup E. As said in this paper, as well as this book. And we know that Natufians are pre-pottery A and pre-pottery B peoples. Here's a good map of the area. And we know that the Levant was pretty much dominated by haplogroup E, who these Semites descend from. Akkadians descend from PPNB expansion from the Levant into Mesopotamia, so therefore Akkadians likely had haplogroup E and spread it into Mesopotamia. And this is sort of what we see when we look at the migration of haplogroup E from the Levant into Mesopotamia. The ancestors of Israel likely carried haplogroup E because this is the Y-DNA of Proto-Semites, and Proto-Semites descend from Neolithic Levantine Natufians who had haplogroup E. So if anybody were to ask me, why do I believe the ancestors of Israel have haplogroup E? This is why. Now, for the summarizing the phenotype, providing the best scenario for the phenotype of the ancestors of the ancient Hebrews of Israel and their ancestors, we begin with the Basal Eurasians, who were likely the people who brought haplogroup E into Africa, and their phenotype is very similar to recent Africans and Upper Paleolithic peoples. Natufians, who are the ancestors of Proto-Semites, they were linked with Niger-Congo populations in terms of phenotype. And the Semitic population of Umbud and Kish had a brown Euro-African phenotype, which is basically African in origin and has African features, as described earlier. The brown Euro-African is of Umbud, and the brown Euro-African is of Kish. Just re-showing you the papers where you can find it. And the description of these peoples is quote unquote Negroid. And the brown Euro-African is connected to Negroes, or Negro phenotype, Negro peoples, and is from Africa. It's re-showing you everything we've gone over so far. And it's all just a euphemism for Negro. And when we look at the murals of Syria, of Mari, Syria, and ancient Semitic civilizations, and when we put it all together with the Natufians, you likely get the phenotype of Proto-Semites. So this is what I believe a Proto-Semite would look like, the ancestors of Abraham and perhaps even Abraham himself. I believe this is what he would have resembled. The ancestors of Israel likely looked African because early Semites in Umbud and Kish looked like brown Euro-Africans who look African. Therefore, Proto-Semites descend from Natufians who also looked African. After all, it's believed that Semites were Africans and early West Asians resembled Africans. Also, Shem's descendants are described as being dark brown-skinned peoples. This, of course, is very similar to the idea that Greeks have that said that dark-skinned peoples lived on both sides of the Red Sea. Therefore, historians have always believed that there was a dark belt of humanity that stretched from Africa to India in ancient times. As said earlier, after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of people already in the area. Early West Eurasians resembled Africans. This is from a rabbi who says, he especially blessed Shem and his sons black but commonly, and he gave him the inhabitable earth. This is from a Muslim. The children of Shem settled in the center of the earth, which is between Satrap and the sea, and between Yemen and Syria. Allah made the descendants from them, revealed the books to them, and made them beautiful, gave them a black complexion, luminous and free of blemish. This is from a book dealing with the Greeks. In ancient times, Ethiopia extended over vast domains in both Africa and Asia. It seems certain, declares Sir E. A. Williams Bulge, that classical historians and geographers called the whole region from India to Egypt, both regions inclusive, by the name Ethiopia, and in consequence, they regarded all dark-skinned peoples and black peoples who inhabited as Ethiopians. Mention is made of Eastern and Western Ethiopians, and it's probable that Easterners were Asiatics and the Westerners Africans. In addition, Bulge notes that Homer and Herodotus called all the peoples of the Sudan, Egypt, Arabia, Palestine, and West Asia and India Ethiopians. Another classical historian who wrote about the Ethiopians was Strabo, from whom we quote the following. I assert that the ancient Greeks, in the same way as they classify all northern nations with which they were familiar as Scythians, etc., so I affirm they designated as Ethiopia the whole of the southern countries toward the ocean. Iridorus says that the Ethiopians were considered as occupying all the south coast of both Asia and Africa, and adds that this is an ancient opinion to the Greeks. And this is from a 19th century writer. He says, Sir Arthur Keith finds that Arabs small-headed and decides that they belong to the great belt of brown-skinned peoples stretching from in Egypt to India, rather than to the European race proper. He postulates that during the Epiolithic, a solid belt of deeply pigmented non-whites reached from Negro Africa across Arabia to India and out to Malaysia, and that subsequently Caucasian peoples invaded Arabia, and that thus the modern Arab is a mixture between inclusive whites and Aboriginal blacks, who were related on one hand to the Hamites and to the other hand the Dravidians. And when you really think about it, you kind of can see that there was in ancient times a great belt of dark-skinned peoples that stretched from Eastern Africa to India, because here's a map that shows indigenous skin tones, how things were in the past according to UV lights and radiation. So conclusion, when it comes to genotype and phenotype, the ancestors of Israel likely carried haplogroup E, because this is the Y DNA of Proto-Semites and Proto-Semites descend from Neolithic Natufians who had haplogroup E. Therefore, if we look at modern day children of Israel, logically, I would assume of the ancestors of Israel and the Israelites themselves had haplogroup E, then the descendants would also have haplogroup E. With that being said, there are more methods to prove Israelite ancestry genetically. Y-DNA haplogroups is one method, but in the future, I'll cover more. But for now, my position is that the ancestors of Israel, the Israelites themselves, and their descendants would have haplogroup E when you put all this information together. It's the most logical way to go about this. Now, phenotype. The ancestors of Israel likely looked like Africans because early Semites in Umbud and Kish looked like browner Africans who looked like Africans themselves. Furthermore, Proto-Semites descend from Natufians who also look like Africans or Niger Congo populations of people. Likewise, with phenotype, the ancestors of Israel and perhaps even the Israelites themselves had a Natufian or a brown or African feature to them. Then logically, I will also believe that the descendants would have the same phenotype. Although I'm not saying the descendants of Israel have to only have a type of Natufian phenotype. They can have others because time has passed, but I'm definitely going to be looking for people who may resemble Natufians as being descendants of Israel too. So conclusion, the next presentation, I'll go on into the young earth, the old earth, and Abraham to Joseph. Now we're going to actually dig into the scriptures. We're going to dig into how does this work biblically using an old earth model as well as a young earth model, young earth meaning 6,000 years. How can we mesh this together? How can we harmonize the scriptures with this? And we'll also specifically be dealing with biblical people like Abraham. We're going to begin from Abraham to Joseph. Now it's time for the Q&A. Understand, though, that I might not answer some questions because some of your questions might be explained in the next or future presentations. So try to keep your questions pertaining to this presentation. But yeah, let's begin with the Q&A. And hopefully y'all got all that.
All right, everybody. You got any questions for the young phenom, the hero of Israel? It's time to bring them in. Excellent presentation, by the way, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Right. Let me see. There was something earlier, but that guy kept trolling, so he kind of got blocked.
Oh, there was a guy trolling. What was he saying?
He was basically saying that we were jealous of E1B1B. So I think he doesn't understand that we look at E1B1A and E1B1B as the geneticists would look at it as coming from the same ancestral fathers.
Yeah, actually, since he said that, I know he's gone now, but I might as well just remind if he's on like a different account. Let me remind him of this factor. Let me see, where is it? And just in case other people probably don't know or didn't hear. So I'm just going to pretend he's still in the comments. But to that guy, when it comes to Proto-Afroasiatic and the father of Proto-Afroasiatic languages, they say that it was E-P2. And E-P2 even includes E1B1A. Let me go to my other presentation and actually show that while I wait for people to join.
You want me to drop the link in the comment section so they can come in?
Yeah, they can ask me questions. And I was just gonna pull this up for that guy just in case he's still here. Maybe he didn't hear what I said. This presentation was really generally only about E and Afroasiatic origins. It wasn't really about one E over the other. It was just a general presentation. Let me show this really quick before people start hopping on. So if you're still there, person, check this study out. Down below it says the Proto-Afroasiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at the point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups, including current speakers of the Afroasiatic languages and pastoralist populations. Now, what is E-P2? Well, they're saying that it's Proto-Afroasiatic, and P2 includes M2, which includes E1B1A. So technically speaking, E1B1A could also be considered Afroasiatic. The Proto-Afroasiatic grouping carrying the E-P2 mutation. P2 includes E1B1B and E1B1A, also known as V38 or M2. So yeah. But waiting for whoever wants to come in.
I'm gonna let you answer this one.
Okay.
I think this is pretty simple, but I'm so
So where was E1B1A during all this time? Can you give me a specific date range? Like, do you mean the Neolithic? Do you mean the copper, the early bronze? What can you give me a few specifics? What do you mean by time? I just want to kind of know.
let's go with the Neolithic.
Okay. Well, it seems that E in the Neolithic would have been in the Levant because there was an Natufian sample with the E-P2 sample, which is ancestral to E1B1A and E1B1B. So I would say the Levant region is where E1B1A would have been before like really leaving that region. It was basically in the Levantine region. We even find Ramses III, who was from the, I believe, not the Iron Age, the Late Bronze Age. Yeah, Ramses III from the Late Bronze Age had E1B1A, which again supports the idea that E1B1A was in that Levantine Egyptian region of the world before migrating into sub-Saharan Africa. So I'll say the Levantine corridor, because that includes Egypt, or the Eastern Mediterranean, because that also includes Egypt and Israel.
What was the name of the I think he's an anthropologist that said that the Proto-Semites were basically Negroes? What was his name?
Christopher Eretz. When we pull him up again.
Yeah. Put that back on the screen. That was fire.
He's a well-known, really well-respected linguist, and I like his work. Although I personally propose a Levantine origin for Semites, but if anybody wants to have a North African origin for Semites, then I would prefer you to look at Christopher Eretz. I know that a Somali man on Clubhouse prefers his model for the origin of Proto-Afro-Asiatic. Actually, let me pull up this one. All right, I should be able to find it easier here. In an old Earth model, I probably would say North Africa is a good origin point. North Africa.
Yeah, that one right there is gonna shake up a lot of rooms in Clubhouse. I can see right now.
Oh yeah, a lot of people just don't know that so many people believe early Semites were Africans. I mean, I didn't even know that. I'm not gonna lie and pretend that I knew, but it's shocking when you find out. I can show you his book as well when you're done looking at it.
Yeah, what's the title of this book?
Well,
I would like to purchase it.
This right here is an interview from the university, and he's speaking to someone about early Semites. But he also has this book right here, where he says you can read what's in yellow because it's the most important. Well, actually, no, this is a different guy. My bad. This is another linguist who says Semites come from Africa. It basically says, thus from North Africa, wave after wave of Semitic migrations would seem to have set forth. The earliest of these migrants and those who went furthest to the east were the Akkadians, who journeyed along the Fertile Crescent through Palestine and Syria and crossing over into Mesopotamia, reached northern Babylonia 3000 BC and founded the first Semitic empire at Kish. And we mentioned Kish. So that's not his book, but that's just another guy. Let me go back to the one you wanted, though. But yeah, you can type in the title, The Conversation with Christopher Ehret, and you can read the whole transcript. And this isn't the only one, by the way, that mentions that. There's another one if you want it.
Yeah, no, I mean that right there is just like,
this is a book. This is an actual book right here. It says, hence it may have been Africa that gave birth to the languages spoken by the authors of the Old and New Testaments and the Quran, the moral pillars of Western civilization. The book Guns, Germs, and Steel. Y'all might be familiar with that book in college. I know that's one of the books you might read in history. Might be recommended by a professor or whatever. I'll go back to the other one. But yeah, that one is definitely powerful, this one. Did someone have a question? I didn't see. I saw something pop up, but I was doing other stuff.
right here.
So E-P2 was in the Levant during the time of Israel then? E-P2 is pretty ancient. It was before Israel. I would say E-P2 is an ancestor of Israel. But yes, it was in the Levant. By the time of Israel, they already would have been broken up into various sub-branches. Been their own people, basically. But great question, though. Great question.
Let me see.
Not a lot of people tonight, probably because it's a Monday night. People had to work and stuff.
Yeah, they're just watching. They're probably like, it's so late.
Yeah. Monday, first day of the week. Everybody going back to work and stuff.
I'm strolling through now, see if I can find something.
I'll probably also go on Clubhouse after this. I'll stay on here a little bit longer to see if anybody pops up with a question, but I'll probably also go to Clubhouse.
Arya Nasi research says if E1B1A existed before E1B1B, then how could E1B1B be Ishmael? Interesting.
If E1B1A existed before E1B1B, then how could E1B be Ishmael? All right, so to sort of, well, actually, I don't think that's even a question. If E1B1A, so you're saying if it existed? Well, it actually didn't exist before E1B1B. They both kind of popped up at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And as for Ishmael, I wouldn't say all of E1B1B is Ishmael. It will be like one specific clade. And I actually went over some clades of E that's exclusively seen in the Arabian Peninsula. And I'll say those are Ishmael. Let me actually show you like an example of that. Because there are some clades like this right here. It says that F1382 appears to have expanded during the Iron Age from the Levant to the Arabian Peninsula, where it is exclusively found today. So a branch like that, I would say, is Ishmael, or could be a descendant of Ishmael or something. Because you do have to keep in mind there's different branches of E1B1B. Basically, the ones that are in the Arabian Peninsula today, I would say, are Ishmael.
Okay, yeah. That was the last one I could glean from the comments.
Okay, that's fine. We can probably end it here then. Go on the club.
Oh, we got D Red in the building. Red. Oh, well, we got a question. Hold on before you get to Red. This is a regular on the channel. RW Smith says your thoughts on E1B1C and its chances of being Esau.
I actually don't believe E1B1C is Esau. I just think it would just be another possible, Israelite sub branch, or even like a Midianite. Like there's so many biblical characters and people and ethnic groups in the scriptures. I have to read and see. First, I have to see where is this one found. I think it's found in Ethiopia, but I have to see who that could connect with. Now, if you want to know who my thoughts are on Esau, I slightly went into it during the presentation. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to just show you a map, and I'm just going to show you a map, and that will tell you who I believe Esau is. And just give me a quick second. It's probably way on down here, actually.
Yeah, you got another one that just came in too after that one.
Okay. Oh, now I hear the questions come as I get ready to leave. So if you want to know my thoughts on Esau, just look at this map, and that kind of gives you an idea. I don't want to go too deep into it because I have to prove it, but basically, my persuasion is that Esau could be E-B13, and I'm not going to go too deep as to why. I have to prove that at another date. But if you're familiar with extra biblical texts, you would see why I would say Esau is this branch. This branch of E. But yep. So what's the next question?
King James says, "What is the origin of E1A? That is my haplogroup."
I have a personal. Actually, let me visualize this one as well. So, what's interesting about the scriptures is that there's a lot of people that we don't know about, and this is probably the best example of it. So let me make this bigger for you to see. So it says, Arphaxad lived 35 years and begot Shelah. After he begot Shelah, Arphaxad lived 430 years and begot sons and daughters. So who are these sons and daughters? In my opinion, when looking at the straight bloodline all the way to Abraham, I believe that he would produce, haplogroup E. But when it comes to like E1 and E1A, I believe they represent these other peoples that we don't really know about or hear about, because there were other branches of people that come from the lineage of Arphaxad, who ultimately Abraham comes from. Who are these mysterious people? I personally would say it's E1A individuals, these sons and daughters, these people who weren't named, but who existed. So I would still say you're Shemitic. I'll still say you're from Shem, but you're from the other branches of people that Arphaxad had, the other sons that he had. That'll be my best guess.
All right. Make sure you guys get your questions in. Waiting for more questions. We got D Red in the building. What's going on?
Shit, what it do? I mean, shit. If y'all did a good presentation, I fuck with it. Keep confirm a lot of research. he used different sources, but he confirmed that the conclusions I came to. So it's good that we got another little young killer on the deck. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? We got some more killers in the chamber. We got more bullets. And so, yeah, man, the young killer did his thing. I was definitely tuned in. I was definitely engaged. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
So I'm proud of him, man. He did good, man. Like I said, this was funny how we use these different sources, but we all come to the same conclusion. Use different sources, so so the evidence, the evidence is overwhelming. You know what I'm saying? That the whole Mediterranean region was black. You know what I'm saying? So to speak, for lack of a better term. And, yeah,
Yeah,
did a good job.
yeah, much appreciated.
Yeah, it's like at some point someone has to wave the white flag, and the J markers. I mean, I think it's time. You had a great run. You know, but
Around be still trying to hold on to that 12 mark.
I know, bro. It's time to wave the white flag. Orthodox Moore has a question right here. What haplogroups are you saying are Hamites?
All right, let me show you that on my other presentation, my part 2 that I did tonight. Give me a quick second here. Let me visualize this. I don't want to just say it without evidence. So, this, that, this, there. All right. All right, share my screen. Okay. So a paper came out, Orthodox More, that you should read. It talks about the ancient admixture into Africa from the ancestors of non-Africans. And basically the consensus is that these Eurasians that came into Africa were men bearing haplogroup E. And haplogroup DE is a basal Eurasian, ancestral Eurasian haplogroup. So I don't really see E being from Ham. And there's a long paper. There's a long paper that you can read that deals with E coming from the Middle East going into Africa, and it says down here that finally there is the facts why haplogroup E is dominant among non-hunter gatherers in Africa, and it is within the Eurasian clade DE, while indigenous African hunter-gatherers belong to haplogroup A00, and B. So I would say that the true Africans or Paleo-Africans are haplogroup A00 and B. Here's a good map. Here's another paper / map that deals with the oldest haplogroups we see in Africa, which is A and B, among Khoisanes and Pygmies and Nilots. I believe that these are your Hamites. And there's a paper that came out in 2014 and 2020 that basically shows that the continent of Africa was once dominated by haplogroup A and B before E came in and basically pushed people of A and B southward. The oldest people of West Africa, as an example, had Y chromosome A and B and mitochondrial DNA L0 and L1. So here's a map that shows haplogroup A pretty much throughout the continent. And here's a map showing haplogroup B also throughout the continent. And haplogroup E basically pushed these A and B people southward, while E became the Afroasiatics and Semites that dominated the Mediterranean. This is why haplogroup E is considered Afro-Mediterranean, while haplogroup A and B is considered African or Hamite. And just to go a little bit further, I'm going to show you my first presentation. You can't really just think of haplogroup E. You also have to think of it as haplogroup DE. And D went into East Asia among people such as Tibetans and Japanese and other East Asian peoples. And I personally don't see Japanese as being Hamites or Tibetans. Let me show you that map of haplogroup D. Further on down. Give me a quick second. I want you to see this.
Orthodox Moore also wanted you to know that your presentation tonight was on point, brother.
Oh, thank you, Orthodox.
Here it is right here. Great presentation, by the way, he says.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to quickly try to show you this map of D Orthodox, and then I'll go to the next question. Let me see, where is it? Kind of wish it loads a little bit faster. I just want to visualize for you when it comes to this. And like 400 slides. So. All right, here it is. All right, I did all that to show this. So here's haplogroup D, and what we have to think of is that haplogroup DE are linked together, and so you can't. When you think of E, you have to also keep in mind that D is its brother essentially, and it's seen predominantly in East Asia. And I don't believe all these East Asians are Hamites. I believe that they're honestly, I believe that they're Semitic as well. They're Asiatic, as well. They just went to the east. But any other questions?
Let's see. I get this question a lot, and King James is saying some say E1A is no, that's not the one. That's not the one. Oh, maybe you want to address that one too, but he did ask another question. Where is it?
All right, I'll answer that one. Some say E1A is Ishmael. Based on my admixture, that's unlikely. So I guess by admixture, you mean autosomally. But yeah, I wouldn't say E1A is Ishmael. Like I said, I think E1A would be those other sons and daughters, well, not daughters, but those other sons of Arphaxad, because we don't really know who those people are. And since my opinion is that the ancestors of Israel, including Arphaxad, had haplogroup E, someone has to be the side branch of E1A. So I would say these side branches of E1A are Arphaxad and them, Arphaxad's sons, the unidentified sons.
Okay, he had another one too. I'm trying to find it, and it's something that comes up a lot on my channel, and I've probably explained this 1,000 times. But where's it at? King James. Where's the question at?
Ask him to retype it.
Yeah, I might have to. Oh, here it is. How is E1A still around? Seems to be an ancient lineage.
I mean, there's a lot of branches of other haplogroups that are old, but they're still around. I mean, you can find old clades of R in people like in Central Asia. So I don't think E1A will be the exception to having old clades. There's people with DO, which is really, really old. and you can still find it in like Tibetans and people of that nature. So you can definitely find old clays. It's just that your people weren't wiped out. that's the simplest way to put it. Your people, are still here. They're still alive. They were able to pass on their genes because as what is a haplogroup down to its basic definition, passed down from father to son, father to son, father to son. You descend from a line of men that just, kept living. And that's why you still have E1A. It wasn't wiped out like, other lineages were.
Okay. R.W. Smith says, I remember reading somewhere that haplogroup D is found in Nigeria.
Yeah, it was only found in, I believe, 1 or 2 Nigerians, but also haplogroup D was found in a Syrian and also in a Saudi Arabian and a few others. And basically this kind of collaborates with the idea that D more than likely split in the Middle East, where a lot of them went to the Far East and some of them stayed in the Middle East and a few of them went into Africa. But like I said, there's only like 1 or 2 Nigerian men with D. Not a lot to say that to say much.
All right. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Okay, you answered that one. I think that might be it. If you guys got any more questions, it's prime time to ask them.
Yeah, I'll make a clubhouse room right now, actually, and if anybody wants to go there, we can chat. Make that. And like I said, my third presentation will be coming out soon. I gotta actually have time to work on it. I had these 2 done, but I gotta put together that third one, and then I gotta do one for haplogroup J. It's academic origins and what its possible biblical origins. Or who biblically it would come from, should I say.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what that troll, like he just kept spamming the chat saying that we were jealous of E1B1B and
I don't really understand how giving a presentation on the origins of Afro-Asiatic exposits jealousy. Like, how does that work?
And when you were giving the Ethiopic and the Omatic examples of the phenotype, he pretty much was just saying in the chat that they were all white Caucasian or something to that effect over and over again, So I don't know, man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I was just, providing what the scientific consensus is.
Right.
And also, if that guy's still there, or for people who may not know this, Caucasoid is really just a skull type. It just means you have a thin nose and your lips aren't thick. But other than that, that's all it really is. It's nothing that drastic, because Indians in India, they call them Caucasoid, but it's just because of their skull structure. That's about it.
Right. But you brought up all of the specimens found in pre-pottery, Neolithic B and A. I forget the other period that you brought up, but you pretty much gave everybody the every specimen, which all had E markers at a time, and that's an argument that we use because and you can see why academia is going the way they're going with what you're revealing about these people with these markers would have to be the proto-Semites and the progenitors of the Semites because they're the only ones there. So,
Right.
would you like to, touch on that before we, just a little bit more before we close the show?
Yeah, so you're right. When it comes to a lot of the ancient remains we find in the Levant, the southern Levant, the northern Levant, basically Israel, is haplogroup E clades, various branches of it. So it makes sense that slowly you are seeing a consensus that the proto-Semites would have carried E because we see it in the most oldest, quote unquote, Semitic civilizations. As y'all know or may not know, the Natufians built the city of Jericho, and we see that haplogroup E was in Ebola, ancient Syrian Semitic civilization played, and basically see E dispersed from the Levant, appearing in ancient Semitic civilizations all the way into Mesopotamia. So, this is why I believe the Israelites would have haplogroup E, because logically that's just what makes sense from what we see when you look at it timeline wise of E migrating outward and producing Semitic languages, because the Natufians are the ancestral Semites who only had haplogroup E.
Yeah, powerful information, man. And those with the J markers, man, that's something, that's a pill they got to swallow. But like I said, these great points, and our viewers here and our audience is eating it up and enjoying it and loving it. And they're waiting for more, brother. So now you done spoiled them. Now they're going to expect this from you, brother.
I got more coming. Y'all gonna love the haplogroup J presentation. It's gonna be good.
All right, I don't think we got any more questions coming in, so I think I'm gonna close it out, brother. Did you want to shout out any of your social media and stuff like that before we close?
I have a YouTube. It's the Hebrew of Israel, and I also have a few other accounts. I could just show the. I'll show my Clubhouse. I'll show some of my socials, stuff.
Yeah, but it's simply the same name on like Twitter, Instagram, like it's the Hebrew of Israel on all of them across the board.
Correct. I'll just quickly show them all. So here is my YouTube. Can y'all see it? This is my YouTube channel. This is what it looked like. No videos are uploaded, not yet. This is my BitChute. This is my Daily Motion. This is my DTube. This is my Rumble Room. It's right here. And y'all can, pause it whenever you need to and look it up. This is my Connect FX, D Live. Again, y'all can pause it. Brand new tube, Twitch. Then I'm also on Clubhouse. This is my actual Clubhouse account. This is my my room, my Clubhouse room of the Hebrew of Israel. I'm about to be on there right now as I speak. This is my Twitter, my Facebook accounts, a Facebook page, my Instagram, and I'm also on Medium. I'm on Quota. I'm on Reddit, Hebrew Sphere, Macedon, Black Men's Zone. And if you want to support me, I have a Patreon, a PayPal, and a GoFundMe. So I'm about to be on Clubhouse right now.
All right, so you guys know where to find him on all social media platforms: Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, YouTube, the Hebrew of Israel. So, you know, go show your support and love for the brother and subscribe.
All right. Shalom.
Shalom. We're going to close out. See you guys tomorrow with another live.
Big business.
RSK, let it play, boy.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. I wake up and say me a prayer. Brush my teeth, babe, then I throw on some threads. Wash my face, grab a cup, hold me some yum. Put on my backpack, then I'm off to the bread. I eat these devils for breakfast, gotta be careful. Whole lot of blood being shed in the streets. World is so wicked, I weep for the living. I drop a free church for the dead. All my white friends in my pocket, or either they loading onto this black card that I swipe. Say every time that I drop it, the verses be hitting more harder than problems of life. Rich, I collected 2 pennies from every person that willingly gave me advice. Being afraid can't exist in my spirit. I'm fearing no man but the Father in Christ. I put in work with the brothers. We stood on them corners from 10 to like 9 the same night, teaching our people the gospel, equipped with a camera, some posters, some speakers, and mic. Every time that I see mama, she telling me, son, you gotta walk in the light. Christ, the bread of heaven, keep feeding my spirit, and I wanna low, not a slide. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
When I tell you I'm an Israelite, tribe of Judah, don't you take it personal. Bleed the blood on these demons, we purging them. Don't entertain Jezebels, we be curving them. Ayy, I got a ribbon, she virtuous. In person, this blue life ain't virtual. I can't forget when I heard the truth. I got cut with that word, it got surgical. Conviction can lead to repentance. I pray these verses encourage you. We repented, now we on the vertical. Judah rising, see Isaiah 32. Big business, nothing minuscule. I picked up that pen back in middle school. Guard your light and take heed who you listen to. Watch your mouth and your ears and your vision too. Hashatan and Shalkani won't finish you. In Mortal Kombat, this war is not physical. Gird your loins up and follow the general. Messiah is coming, that's scriptural. You gotta starve your flesh. The real war ain't even started yet. This look like a setup for a second exodus. I'm trying to be where the water at. Let's get it.
When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers. When I tell them I'm an Israelite, it's big business, not miniature. Serving same thing as minister. Kill the flesh, how to finish them. These commandments, they'll sustain you. I'm surrounded by these angels. I ain't worried, I'm protected from seen and unseen dangers.
All right, reminder, if you guys want to speak with the brother a little bit longer, you can follow him on Clubhouse. He's about to create a room. Shalom. Much love to y'all. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share the video on the various social media platforms.